I gripped the porcelain edge of the sink, staring at the stranger in my bathroom mirror, my wedding photo mocking me from its frame on the wall. The woman in the reflection, with her wide, shell-shocked eyes and trembling hands, hardly resembled the confident, joyful bride captured in that picture just 2 years ago. 2 hours ago, my life had been perfect. 28 weeks pregnant with our first child, surrounded by friends and family at my baby shower, opening gifts and laughing. Then the doorbell rang, and my world imploded. The moment plays on repeat in my mind, my mother-in-law, supposedly dead for the past 5 years, standing in my doorway, very much alive. "Where's my son?" she had demanded, eyes scanning the room full of stunned guests. "Where's Jacob?" My husband's face had drained of color when he saw her. "Mom," he'd whispered, the word hanging in the air like a confession. I'd stood there frozen, one hand protectively cupping my swollen belly, as the impossible truth dawned on me. Jacob had lied about his mother's death. A fundamental lie that had shaped our entire relationship. Now, locked in our bathroom, I could hear hushed, urgent voices from the living room. The baby shower guests had tactfully departed, leaving only Jacob, his very much alive mother, and the shattered remains of my trust. A soft knock interrupted my spiral of thoughts. "Vanessa?" Jacob's voice cracked with desperation. "Please talk to me." I turned on the faucet, letting the water drown out his pleas. How could I face him? How could I ever trust him again? The man I married, the man whose child I carried, was a stranger to me now. And I had no idea what to do next. The lies had started on our third date. We were at a small Italian restaurant, candlelight dancing between us as Jacob told me about his life. "My mom died when I was in college," he'd said, eyes downcast, voice weighted with practiced grief. "Cancer. It was quick, at least." I'd reached across the table to squeeze his hand, my heart aching for his loss. In that moment, a bond had formed between us. I'd lost my father to a heart attack just a year before. Shared grief became the foundation of our connection. "It's just me and my dad now," he'd continued. "We're not that close." He took Mom's death hard. Remarried pretty quickly. Over the following months, Jacob had carefully constructed an entire history around his mother's death, the hospital where she'd passed away, how he'd been holding her hand in those final moments, even a detailed account of her funeral. All lies. And now, as I sat on the cold bathroom floor, I couldn't stop wondering, why? Why create such an elaborate deception? What kind of person fabricates their own mother's death? Another knock, more insistent this time. "Vanessa, please. Let me explain." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. The baby kicked inside me, a reminder that I couldn't hide in here forever. "5 minutes," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears as I unlocked the door. Jacob stood in the hallway, his face ashen, eyes red-rimmed. Behind him, in our living room, I could see his mother sitting stiffly on our sofa, examining the abandoned baby shower decorations with obvious distaste. "Not here," I said, nodding toward our bedroom. "In there." Once the door closed behind us, I maintained a careful distance, arms crossed protectively over my belly. "Start talking," I demanded. "And I swear to God, Jacob, if you lie to me again." He sank onto the edge of our bed, hands clasped between his knees. "I haven't spoken to my mother in 5 years, he began, voice hollow. "We had a falling out. A bad one." "So you told me she was dead?" I interrupted incredulously. "Who does that?" "You don't understand what she's like," he pleaded. "She's controlling, manipulative. She made my childhood a living hell." I shook my head, not trusting his words anymore. So rather than simply saying I'm estranged from my mother, you decided to kill her off in some fictional cancer scenario? Do you have any idea how twisted that is? Jacob ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration I'd once found endearing. Now it just seemed theatrical. When we met, everything was so perfect between us, he explained desperately. I was afraid if I told you the truth, that I'd cut my family out of my life, you'd think there was something wrong with me. So instead you lied. For 2 years. My voice cracked. You let me console you on her birthday. You let me put flowers on a non-existent grave. The memory of driving with Jacob to the cemetery, watching him place lilies on a random headstone, made bile rise in my throat. How did she find us? I asked. My cousin must have told her. He saw our pregnancy announcement on Facebook. Jacob looked toward the door, lowering his voice. Vanessa, you need to understand, she can't be part of our lives. She's toxic. I laughed bitterly. The only toxic person I see is the one who lied to me every day for 2 years. The one I apparently never knew at all. The baby kicked again, stronger this time. I placed my palm against the spot, drawing strength from this innocent life, depending on me to make the right choices. I want you to leave, I said finally. I need space. Time to think. Vanessa, please. No. I cut him off. You don't get to plead your case right now. You've lied about something so fundamental that I'm questioning everything about our relationship. Were there other women? Other families? God, no. Jacob looked genuinely shocked. I would never. But you would lie about your mother's death, I pointed out coldly. So clearly your moral compass is pretty damaged. He flinched as if I'd struck him. I want you out. Tonight. Go stay with a friend, I don't care. But I can't look at you right now without feeling sick. Jacob stood slowly, defeat slumping his shoulders. What about her? He gestured vaguely toward the living room. I thought for a moment. I'll talk to her. Maybe she'll tell me the truth, since you're clearly incapable of it. I followed him out of the bedroom, maintaining my distance as if he were contagious. In a way, his deception was, it had infected every memory, every moment we'd shared. When we reached the living room, his mother stood, straightening her expensive-looking blazer. Finally, she said, her cultured voice tinged with impatience. Jacob, we need to talk. Not now, Mother, Jacob replied wearily. I'm leaving. Vanessa needs space. Elizabeth Mercer, the woman whose name I'd only heard mentioned as part of a tragic past, raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. Leaving? Don't be ridiculous. This is clearly just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I repeated, incredulity giving my voice new strength. Your son told me you were dead. He took me to a cemetery and pretended to visit your grave. That's not a misunderstanding, that's pathological. Elizabeth's eyes widened slightly, the only indication that this information surprised her. She recovered quickly. Jacob has always had a flair for the dramatic, she said dismissively. Though I must say, declaring me dead is a new low. Jacob grabbed his keys from the hook by the door. I'm going to Mark's. Call me when, if you want to talk. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that somehow felt more final than a slam would have. Elizabeth and I regarded each other in tense silence. She was elegant in a way that spoke of old money and rigid upbringing, silver-streaked dark hair pulled into an immaculate chignon, tailored clothes, and imperceptible makeup that enhanced rather than concealed her age. "Would you like some tea?" I offered automatically, social conditioning kicking in despite the surreal circumstances. "That would be lovely," she replied, following me to the kitchen. As I filled the kettle, Elizabeth examined our home with the critical eye of an inspector, occasionally touching a surface or picking up a photo frame. "So," she said when we were finally seated at the kitchen table, steaming mugs between us. "My son told you I was dead." I nodded, too emotionally drained for anything but directness. "Cancer. 5 years ago." Elizabeth took a measured sip of tea. "And you believed him?" Something in her tone, a subtle suggestion that I should have known better, sparked my depleted anger back to life. "Of course I believed him," I snapped. "He's my husband. People don't generally lie about their parents being dead." "You clearly don't know my son very well," she replied coolly. "Jacob has always chosen the path of greatest drama." "Or maybe he had reasons," I countered, surprising myself by defending the man I'd just thrown out. "He said you were controlling. Toxic." Elizabeth placed her mug down with deliberate precision. "Did he tell you why we haven't spoken in 5 years?" I hesitated, realizing Jacob had conveniently left out this detail. "I thought not," she continued, satisfaction evident in her tone. "Has he mentioned his brother, Thomas?" Another shock. "He told me he was an only child." Elizabeth's composed facade cracked slightly, genuine pain flashing across her features. "Of course he did." She reached into her purse and withdrew a slim wallet, from which she extracted a photograph and slid it across the table. 2 young men in graduation caps and gowns, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning widely. I recognized Jacob immediately, looking younger and somehow lighter. Beside him stood another young man with the same dark eyes but a rounder face and gentler smile. "Thomas and Jacob, at Thomas's college graduation," Elizabeth explained. "They were only 11 months apart. Almost like twins." I traced the unfamiliar face with my fingertip, feeling as though I was looking at a ghost. "What happened to him?" Elizabeth reclaimed the photo, her movements deliberate as she tucked it safely away. "Thomas died 5 years ago. Car accident. Jacob was driving." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "Jacob was, he never told me." "No, he wouldn't have," Elizabeth said bitterly. "It's easier to pretend I'm the villain than to face what happened." My mind raced, recalibrating everything I thought I knew about my husband. The timing matched perfectly. 5 years ago, when he claimed to have lost his mother, he had actually lost his brother. And apparently, severed ties with his family. "I don't understand," I admitted. "Why would he hide his brother's existence? Why pretend you died instead of telling me the truth?" Elizabeth's gaze was piercing, as if she was deciding how much I deserved to know. "The accident was Jacob's fault. He'd been drinking. Not legally drunk, but enough to affect his reflexes. He walked away without a scratch while Thomas died at the scene." I felt lightheaded, unconsciously placing my hand on my belly for stability. "That's horrible. But accidents happen. Why would he cut you off completely?" "Because I couldn't forgive him," Elizabeth stated plainly. "Not then. Maybe not ever. He killed my son, his brother, through his carelessness, and then he just wanted everyone to move on." The cruelty in her voice made me flinch. I could almost see it now, Jacob, devastated by grief and guilt, facing a mother whose pain had curdled into resentment. "So he ran," I concluded quietly. "And reinvented himself." Elizabeth nodded. made himself the victim in a different tragedy. Much easier to cope with, I imagine. We sat in weighted silence, the implications of these revelations settling around us like ash after an explosion. "Why are you here now?" I finally asked. "After 5 years?" She gestured toward my pregnant belly. "Family is family." When I heard Jacob was going to be a father, well, I thought perhaps it was time to heal old wounds. For the sake of the child, if nothing else. The words were right, but something in her tone felt calculated. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her sudden appearance than reconciliation. "I appreciate your honesty," I said carefully. "But I need time to process all of this. It's been quite a day." Elizabeth nodded, gathering her purse. "Of course. I'm staying at the Westfield Hotel downtown, room 512. Here's my number." She scribbled on a notepad on the counter. "I'd like to get to know the mother of my grandchild, whenever you're ready." At the door, she paused. "Vanessa, I know you're angry with Jacob right now. As you should be. But remember, he's been carrying this guilt for 5 years. It changes a person." After she left, I stood in the middle of our living room, surrounded by half-opened baby gifts and sagging balloons, feeling untethered from reality. The home that had felt so safe this morning now seemed filled with lies, as if the very walls had been constructed from Jacob's deceptions. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a name. After a moment's hesitation, I pressed call. "Emma? It's me. I know it's late, but something's happened. Can I stay with you tonight? I'll explain everything when I get there." As I packed an overnight bag, I paused at our dresser, staring at the framed ultrasound picture beside a photo from our wedding day. The husband I thought I knew smiled back at me, his arm around my waist, face alight with what I'd interpreted as love. Now I wondered if it had been relief at having successfully outrun his past and created a new identity, unburdened by the tragedy he'd caused. I picked up the ultrasound frame but left the wedding photo behind. Truth had exploded into my carefully constructed life today. And in its blast radius, nothing remained unchanged. Emma's guest room felt like a sanctuary after the emotional maelstrom of the day. I lay in the unfamiliar bed, one hand resting on my belly, trying to make sense of the fragmented pieces of what I'd thought was my life. "You're sure I can't get you anything else?" Emma hovered in the doorway, her kind face creased with concern. "Tea? Another pillow?" "I'm fine," I assured her, though fine felt like the most absurd lie. "Just tired." She nodded, unconvinced. "Try to get some sleep. We'll figure everything out tomorrow." After she left, I reached for my phone, noting the missed calls and messages from Jacob. "Please call me. We need to talk. I know I messed up. Let me explain everything. I love you, Vanessa. Please don't let this destroy us." The last one had come just minutes ago. "At least let me know you're safe." I sent a terse reply, at Emma's. "Don't contact me again tonight." Sleep evaded me for hours as I replayed the day's revelations, examining each from every angle like a pathologist dissecting a specimen. The secrets. The lies. The grief that Jacob had twisted and reshaped to cast himself as the victim rather than the cause. But beneath my anger and hurt, a haunting question emerged: what would I have done in his place? Faced with unbearable guilt and a mother who couldn't forgive me, would I too have run? Created a new narrative where I could breathe? The baby stirred inside me, a gentle reminder of the stakes beyond my shattered marriage. This child deserved better than to be born into a foundation of lies. By morning, I had made a decision. I needed the complete truth, not Elizabeth's version, not Jacob's, but something verifiable. Only then could I decide whether my marriage could be salvaged or if it was as dead as Jacob had pretended his mother was. After a quiet breakfast with Emma, I made 2 calls. The first was to my office, explaining that a family emergency would keep me out for a few days. The second was to a name in my contacts I hadn't expected to use in this context, Ryan Mitchell, a college friend who had become a private investigator. I need you to look into something, I explained after brief pleasantries. A car accident from 5 years ago involving Thomas Mercer. I need police reports, newspaper articles, everything you can find. Sounds serious, Ryan replied, professional curiosity evident in his tone. May I ask why? It involves my husband, I said simply. And I need to know the truth. After arranging to meet Ryan the next day, I called Elizabeth at her hotel. I'd like to talk more, I told her. Would you be available for lunch today? We agreed to meet at a cafe near the hotel at noon. Part of me, the journalist who had built a career on fact-checking and verification, was determined to cross-examine her, to find any inconsistencies in her story. But another part simply wanted to understand the woman who had raised the man I'd married, for better or worse. The Elizabeth who greeted me at the cafe seemed more relaxed than the formidable figure who had disrupted my baby shower. Dressed in casual slacks and a silk blouse rather than yesterday's severe suit, she almost looked like any other soon-to-be grandmother. Thank you for meeting me, she said as we settled at a corner table. I realize yesterday was overwhelming. That's one word for it, I agreed, ordering herbal tea while she chose coffee. I have questions. I assumed you would. Elizabeth's composure was remarkable, as if we were discussing nothing more consequential than the weather. Tell me about Thomas, I said. Not just how he died. Who he was. Something softened in Elizabeth's expression, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her. Thomas was gentle. Thoughtful. He felt things deeply. Jacob was always the more outgoing one, the risk-taker. Thomas was his counterbalance. She pulled out her phone, swiping through photos until she found what she wanted, then handed it to me. A family portrait, a younger Elizabeth, a stern-looking man I assumed was Jacob's father, and the 2 brothers, teenagers in this image. They were inseparable growing up, she continued as I studied the photo. Despite being so different, Jacob was always in trouble, nothing serious, just pushing boundaries. Thomas was the peacemaker. I returned her phone, trying to reconcile this new information with the man I'd married. Jacob had never mentioned a brother, let alone one he'd been close to. It seemed impossible to erase such a fundamental relationship from one's history. What happened that night? I asked. The accident. Elizabeth's carefully maintained composure faltered. They were at a party. Jacob insisted on driving, even though he'd been drinking. Thomas tried to take the keys, but... She shook her head. Jacob always had to be in control. The police report confirmed he was drinking? I pressed. She hesitated, just long enough to register. He was just under the legal limit. But any amount is too much, isn't it? I filed away the hesitation, continuing my gentle interrogation. And afterward? What happened between you and Jacob? I was not kind, Elizabeth admitted, surprising me with her candor. I said things no mother should say to her child. But I had just lost my son, my Thomas. And there was Jacob, walking around, physically unharmed while his brother was gone forever. So you blamed him. Wouldn't you? She challenged. If someone's recklessness took away someone you loved? I thought of the baby growing inside me, wondering what I would do if someone harmed this child. The fierce protectiveness I felt gave me a glimpse of Elizabeth's rage. Maybe, I conceded. But he was your son too. He lost his brother that night. And I lost both my sons, Elizabeth replied. One to death and one to guilt. The honesty in her voice was compelling, but something still felt off, rehearsed, perhaps, as if she'd crafted this narrative as carefully as Jacob had constructed his. Why now? I asked, voicing the question that had been bothering me since her arrival. Why reach out after 5 years? Elizabeth smiled sadly. You're carrying my grandchild. Family should be together, especially when a new life is coming into the world. And it has nothing to do with Jacob's recent success? I watched her carefully. Jacob's technology consulting firm had secured a major contract just months ago, transforming him from moderately successful to genuinely wealthy. Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. I wasn't aware of his financial situation. Another note to file away. We finished our lunch with safer topics, her flight, the weather, bland observations about the city. As we parted, Elizabeth hugged me, an awkward gesture that felt obligatory rather than affectionate. Think about what I said, she urged. About family belonging together. The baby deserves to know its grandmother. I nodded noncommittally, already planning my next move. The following morning, Ryan called with the information I'd requested. I've got those reports you wanted, he said. It's interesting. Interesting how? I asked, tension coiling in my stomach. Can you meet me at my office in an hour? When I arrived, Ryan had arranged a timeline of documents across his desk, police reports, newspaper clippings, and printed social media posts, all related to the accident that had claimed Thomas Mercer's life. The basic facts match what you told me, Ryan began. Thomas Mercer, 22, died in a single-vehicle accident 5 years ago. Jacob Mercer, 23, was driving and survived with minor injuries. He pointed to the police report. Blood alcohol for Jacob was 0.07, just under the legal limit of 0.08. He wasn't charged with any crime, ruled an accident when he swerved to avoid a deer. I scanned the report, noting the details. Elizabeth made it sound like he was clearly at fault. That's where it gets interesting, Ryan continued, sliding a newspaper clipping toward me. The Mercer family, particularly Elizabeth, publicly blamed Jacob. There were some nasty quotes in the local press. The headline read, "Mother denounces surviving son after tragic accident." But that's not the most interesting part, Ryan said, pushing forward several printed Facebook posts. These are from Thomas Mercer's account in the months before the accident. I read through them, confusion growing. The posts described arguments with his mother, references to escaping and finally getting away. Thomas and Elizabeth had a severely strained relationship, Ryan explained. From what I could piece together, he was planning to move across the country with his girlfriend, something Elizabeth vehemently opposed. So Jacob wasn't the only one with family issues, I murmured, pieces clicking into place. Ryan nodded. And here's the kicker, the toxicology report showed Thomas had a BAC of 0.15, nearly twice the legal limit. He was significantly more intoxicated than Jacob. I stared at him. Elizabeth never mentioned that. I'm not surprised. It doesn't fit her narrative of Jacob being solely responsible. Ryan gathered the documents into a folder. There's one more thing. I found Thomas's girlfriend, now wife. She lives about an hour from here. He handed me a slip of paper with a name and address. Melissa Evans. She might be able to fill in some blanks. I clutched the folder, a lifeline of facts in a sea of contradictory narratives. Thank you, Ryan. This helps more than you know. Just be careful, he warned as I stood to leave. Family drama like this, it gets messy. I drove directly to the address Ryan had provided, a modest suburban home with cheerful flowers lining the walkway. A young woman answered the door, a toddler balanced on her hip. Melissa Evans? I asked. She nodded, wariness evident in her expression. My name is Vanessa Mercer. I'm Jacob Mercer's wife. Her eyes widened in recognition. Jacob got married? I explained my situation as briefly as I could, watching her face cycle through surprise, sympathy, and finally resolve. You should come in, she said, stepping aside. There are things you need to know. Over the next hour, as her son played with blocks at our feet, Melissa painted a very different picture of the Mercer family than Elizabeth had presented. Elizabeth was controlling to the point of abuse, she stated plainly. Thomas was planning to break free, to move to California with me. She couldn't stand losing control of him. And Jacob? I prompted. Melissa smiled sadly. He was always the buffer between Thomas and Elizabeth. Taking the heat, deflecting her anger. He'd been her target for years, ever since their father left. The image of Jacob as the family scapegoat rather than the irresponsible troublemaker Elizabeth had described shifted my perception yet again. That night, the accident, I began carefully. Melissa, who was really driving? Her eyes filled with tears. It wasn't Jacob, she whispered. It was Thomas. He insisted on driving, even though I begged him not to. He'd been drinking heavily, fighting with Elizabeth all day about our plans to move. My breath caught. But Jacob took the blame. She nodded. By the time I got to the hospital, he'd already told the police he was driving. He said Thomas had his whole life ahead of him. A record would ruin his chances at the job he'd just been offered in California. But Thomas died anyway, I said softly. Jacob never expected that, Melissa explained, wiping away tears. The doctors initially said Thomas would recover. But there were complications, a brain hemorrhage they didn't catch in time. I sat back, stunned by this revelation. And Elizabeth? Does she know the truth? I tried to tell her, after the funeral. She called me a liar, said I was trying to protect Jacob. She needed someone to blame, and Jacob, he let her. He carried that guilt for both of them. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Jacob hadn't been running from responsibility for causing his brother's death, he had been honoring a final act of sacrifice, protecting Thomas's memory even as he accepted his mother's hatred. Thank you, I told Melissa as I prepared to leave. You've helped me understand so much. She caught my hand. Jacob was the best brother Thomas could have asked for. In the end, he proved that in the most painful way possible. I nodded, unable to speak around the lump in my throat. As I drove home, the complete picture finally came into focus. Jacob hadn't lied about his mother's death to manipulate me, he'd done it to protect me from the toxic family dynamic that had nearly destroyed him. In his own damaged way, he'd been trying to build something pure and untainted by the past. The method was wrong, a lie is still a lie, but the motivation wasn't the selfish one I'd initially assumed. When I arrived home, I wasn't entirely surprised to find both Jacob and Elizabeth sitting stiffly in our living room. Vanessa, Jacob stood immediately, relief washing over his face. I was so worried. Elizabeth remained seated, her expression carefully neutral. We were just discussing family matters. I'm glad you've joined us. I looked between them, seeing the tension that 5 years of estrangement had created. I know the truth, I said simply. About the accident. About who was really driving. Jacob paled, while Elizabeth's composure finally cracked. What nonsense is this? She demanded. I spoke to Melissa, I continued calmly. She told me everything. How Thomas was driving that night, not Jacob. How he took the blame to protect his brother's reputation. How you refused to believe the truth, Elizabeth, because you needed someone to punish. Jacob sank back onto the couch, covering his face with his hands. Vanessa, I never wanted you to know any of this. That was your first mistake, I told him, my voice gentle despite the seriousness of my words. Marriages can't survive secrets of this magnitude. I turned to Elizabeth, who had gone very still. And you? You came here not for reconciliation, but because Jacob recently came into money. You saw an opportunity and took it, using your grandchild as leverage. That's absurd, she protested, but the denial lacked conviction. I think you should leave, I said firmly. Now. For a moment, I thought she might argue, but something in my expression must have convinced her it would be futile. She gathered her purse with as much dignity as she could muster. This isn't over, she warned as she reached the door. It is for now, I replied, closing it firmly behind her. When I returned to the living room, Jacob was exactly where I'd left him, looking utterly defeated. I'm so sorry, he whispered. For everything. The lies, the secrets. I thought I was protecting you from my past, but I was really protecting myself from having to face it. I sat beside him, close but not touching. Why didn't you just tell me the truth? About Thomas, about taking the blame? He shook his head, eyes haunted. At first, I couldn't talk about it without falling apart. Then, as time passed, it seemed easier to keep the wall up. To be the person I was with you, not the broken mess I'd been before. And pretending your mother was dead? Was that really necessary? I needed a clean break, he admitted. If I'd told you she was alive but we were estranged, you would have encouraged me to reconcile. You believe in family, in working through problems. But with Elizabeth, there's no working through her need to control, to manipulate. I thought of Melissa's descriptions of Elizabeth's emotional abuse, of how Jacob had shouldered the blame for an accident he hadn't caused, only to be condemned by the mother who should have supported him through such trauma. I understand why you did it, I said after a long pause. But understanding doesn't erase the betrayal. You built our entire relationship on a fundamental lie, Jacob. How can I ever trust you again? He looked at me, raw pain etched in every line of his face. I don't know. I don't deserve your trust. But I'm begging you to give me a chance to earn it back. The baby kicked, a forceful reminder of what was at stake. I can't answer that right now, I told him honestly. I need time. And you need help, professional help, to deal with what happened to Thomas, with the guilt you've been carrying. Jacob nodded, a tear tracking down his cheek. Whatever it takes. I can't lose you and the baby. You're all I have. I stood, physically and emotionally exhausted. I'll be staying at Emma's for a while longer. Use that time to find a therapist. To really think about what honesty means in a marriage. At the door, I paused. And Jacob? If there are any other secrets, anything at all, now is the time to tell me. There won't be another chance. He met my eyes, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine clarity in his gaze. No more secrets. I swear it. I nodded, hoping desperately that this was a promise he could keep. 3 months later, I sat in the nursery of our home, rocking our newborn daughter as Jacob watched from the doorway, hesitation evident in his stance. "She's finally asleep," I whispered, carefully laying Sophia in her crib. We tiptoed out, closing the door with practiced quiet before making our way to the living room. "Coffee?" Jacob offered. "Please." As he busied himself in the kitchen, I reflected on the journey of the past months. Jacob had thrown himself into therapy, confronting the trauma and guilt he'd buried for so long. I had moved back home just before Sophia's birth, still wary but committed to trying. Trust was a fragile seedling we were carefully nurturing, day by day. "Elizabeth called again," Jacob said as he handed me a mug. "Wants to meet Sophia. What do you think?" I asked, studying his reaction. He sighed, settling beside me on the couch. "Part of me wants to give her a chance, for Sophia's sake. But I won't let her near our daughter unless I'm absolutely certain she won't try to control and manipulate her the way she did with Thomas and me." I nodded, appreciating his protective instinct. "We can take it slowly. Supervised visits, on our terms." Jacob took my hand, his touch gentle. "Thank you. For giving me another chance. For not giving up on us." I squeezed his fingers, thinking of the long road ahead. "We're family. The real kind, built on truth, even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult." He nodded, understanding the implicit warning in my words. No more lies. No more secrets. As we sat together in the quiet of our home, Sophia sleeping peacefully in the next room, I felt cautiously hopeful. The foundation of our marriage had cracked under the weight of Jacob's deception, but we were rebuilding it, stronger this time, reinforced with the concrete of painful truths rather than the fragile glass of comfortable lies. The future remained uncertain. Elizabeth's presence in our lives would always be complicated. Jacob's healing would be an ongoing process. But for now, in this moment, we were finding our way back to each other, one honest conversation, one shared truth at a time.